I moved into my house a few months ago, eager to escape the disorder of apartment living and finally have some space to call my own. The neighborhood was peaceful, the kind of place where everyone keeps to themselves, but still greets each other with a friendly gesture. I wasn't thrilled about the idea of a homeowner association, but I knew it was part of the arrangement when buying here. The homeowner association president, Janet, however, was a different matter. I'd heard stories about her before I even signed the contract. Janet was one of those individuals who thought she had the authority to enforce her will on everyone else. Her reputation was well known. She was that one neighbor who would criticize the smallest details and believe every rule, no matter how minor, had to be obeyed completely. Still, I never thought I'd be on the receiving side of her fury. Everything seemed fine at first, and I was doing my best to settle in. The yard had been overlooked by the previous owner, so I started working on it right away, putting in a small garden, fixing the barrier, and tidying up the space. I wasn't doing anything extravagant, just a little improvement here and there to make it feel like home. Then one afternoon, as I was watering my fresh plants, I heard a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated for a second before answering. Standing there was Janet with her clipboard and a look on her face like she had something significant to say. "Hello there," she said in her overly enthusiastic tone. "I'm Janet, president of the Homeowner Association, and I'm here for a quick inspection of your property." I blinked, unsure whether I'd heard her correctly. "Excuse me." "Yeah," she continued, glancing past me toward my backyard. "I need to check your garden, the barrier, and a few other things to make sure everything's up to regulations. It's part of the Homeowner Association guidelines, you know." I shook my head immediately, growing skeptical. "I'm sorry, but I'm not actually part of the Homeowner Association. I didn't enroll in that." She paused, looking me up and down like I just told her I was from another planet. "Well, you should be, but that doesn't matter right now. Homeowner Association members are responsible for maintaining the community expectations, and I have the right to inspect any property in the neighborhood." I felt my frustration start to rise. "No, Janet, you don't. I'm not a member, and I'm not obligated to follow homeowner association rules. This is my property, and I'm asking you to leave." Her face immediately flushed with a mix of disbelief and irritation. "You can't just reject an inspection. What do you think this is, some sort of free-for-all? You need to comply." I stood my ground, folding my arms. "I don't have to do anything, and you don't have the power to come onto my property without approval." Janet huffed, clicking her pen like she was taking notes. "Well, we'll see about that. I'll be back, and you won't be getting away with this." She spun on her heel and marched off, her high heels clacking loudly on the sidewalk. I watched her leave, a sense of unease creeping over me. I knew she wouldn't just let it go, but I didn't expect things to escalate this quickly. Still, I wasn't about to let her walk all over me, especially not when I had every legal right to deny her entry. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. I had a feeling I'd be hearing from Janet again soon, and it wasn't going to be pleasant. Then one morning, I found a bright yellow violation notice taped to my front door. It was the kind of notice you usually get when you've done something that supposedly disrupts the harmony of the neighborhood. The notice said that I was in breach of homeowner association guidelines for my garden, specifically the placement of my new barrier and the size of some of the plants I'd put in it. Even listed possible fines for non-compliance. The whole thing was ridiculous. I pulled the notice off the door and read it again, thinking maybe I'd missed something. Nope, it was just another authority trip from Janet. I wasn't a homeowner association member, and I sure as hell wasn't going to start following some random rules just because she felt like it. I took a picture of the notice and forwarded it to my attorney just to be cautious. My attorney, Carl, was a no-nonsense guy who didn't tolerate any nonsense from individuals like Janet. He quickly reassured me that this was just a scare strategy. The homeowner association had no real jurisdiction over me, and Janet was clearly exceeding her limits. A couple of days passed, and I thought that would be the end of it. I kept working on my garden and just ignored the threats. But then, things started to get strange. I noticed Janet driving past my house more frequently, slowing down as she went by. The next time I was outside watering my plants, I saw her parked across the street, taking pictures of my yard with her phone. She wasn't even being subtle about it. I waved at her, but she quickly turned her head and sped off. This woman was seriously starting to get on my nerves. I knew it was time to take measures. I had the right to privacy, and there was no way I was going to let her turn my life into some homeowner association drama fest. I called Carl again and explained what had been happening. He advised me to install a security camera in my backyard to record anything that came up, just in case things escalated. Even further, I ordered the camera the same day. It was a simple setup, nothing fancy, but it would give me a record if Janet ever tried to make any more advances. But of course, that wasn't the end of it. A few days later, Janet sent a letter demanding I attend a homeowner association meeting to discuss my violations and address the state of my property. The letter even threatened legal action if I failed to show up. It was clear she wasn't going to stop until I surrendered. But I wasn't about to be bullied. I wasn't part of her homeowner association, and I wasn't going to be treated like a criminal just because she felt like it. I decided to let her know exactly where I stood. Instead of just ignoring her letter, I wrote back. I made it clear that I had no lawful obligation to attend any homeowner association meetings, and that I would be filing a formal complaint if she continued to harass me. I also included the documentation of my previous interactions with her, including the violation notice and the photos of her taking pictures from across the street. I sent the letter off with the sense of satisfaction, but I knew Janet wouldn't back down that easily. She had crossed a boundary, and I was ready to make sure she knew. She couldn't just do whatever she wanted. The next move was mine. The next few days were uneasily quiet. I checked my security cameras every day, but there were no more surprise visits or strange photos from across the street. I thought maybe, just maybe, Janet had finally realized I wasn't someone she could push around. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was planning something. A week passed, and I started to feel a bit more at ease, convinced I had put an end to the situation. That was until I woke up one morning to find my backyard gate wide open. I froze. The lock had been broken. I stepped outside, heart pounding, and checked the surrounding area. There were no obvious signs of a break-in, and nothing appeared to be missing from the yard. But the sight of that gate, unlocked and open, sent a chill down my spine. Someone had been here. And I knew exactly who it was. I immediately called Carl. He wasn't happy to hear about the intrusion, but he assured me that this was exactly what I needed to press charges. He advised me to file a police report right away, and make sure to keep the footage from my security cameras. I did just that. The officer who arrived took down my information, reviewed the footage, and agreed that the gate had definitely been tampered with. There wasn't any direct evidence of Janet being the one to do it. But given everything I had already documented, he suggested I speak to the homeowner association directly to warn them about the situation. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Going to the homeowner association felt like playing right into Janet's hands, like giving her a chance to escalate the matter even further. But Carl made a good point. If she was involved in this, the homeowner association needed to be made aware that things were getting out of control. Later that afternoon, received a letter from the homeowner association. This time it was from Janet herself. She demanded that I attend the next homeowner association board meeting to discuss my property violations and settle this matter. Once and for all, my frustration boiled. This woman was relentless. I didn't hesitate. I gathered all the evidence I'd collected so far. Photos of the violation notices, copies of the letters, and a detailed timeline of every single encounter with Janet, and prepared to face her in person. I wasn't going to let her think she could intimidate me anymore. The day of the meeting arrived, and I walked into the small community center, determined to stand my ground. There were a few familiar faces in the room, but all eyes immediately fell on me when Janet stood up and started speaking. She went on and on about how my property was an eyesore, how it violated homeowner association standards, and how it was causing a division in the neighborhood. But I wasn't listening. I had my own statement prepared. I stood up calmly but firmly and addressed the room. I'm not part of this homeowner association, and I never agreed to follow any of its rules. The fact that Janet has been harassing me for weeks, violating my privacy and even trespassing on my property is completely unacceptable. I have already contacted my attorney, and I've been advised to pursue legal action if this behavior continues. The room fell silent. I could see Janet fuming, but I didn't care. I had the facts, I had the evidence, and I wasn't about to let her walk all over me. Then, as if on cue, Janet stood up, her face red with anger. "You have no idea what you're doing," she snapped. "You think you can just ignore the rules and get away with it? You'll regret this." I felt my stomach tighten. There was something in her voice, something that made me realize just how far she was willing to go. But I refused to back down. "I'm not the one who's been breaking the law, Janet. You're the one who's overstepping your limits, and I won't let you intimidate me anymore." The room buzzed with murmurs as Janet's face twisted with rage. She shot me one last venomous look before storming out of the meeting, muttering threats under her breath. As the meeting wrapped up, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Janet was still a threat, and I knew she wasn't going to give up easily. But I'd taken a major step in the right direction. I had set clear boundaries, and now was ready for whatever came next. After the meeting, things quieted down a bit, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still yet to come. Janet had been humiliated in front of the homeowner association board, and I had no doubt she was furious. But at least I'd made it clear that I wasn't backing down. For the next week, I heard nothing from her. No letters, no visits, no strange cars parked outside. It was almost as if she had disappeared. I allowed myself to relax a little. Maybe I'd finally won. Maybe Janet had realized that pushing me any further would only lead to more trouble for her. Then one morning, I received a call from Carl. He sounded serious. "Look, I don't want to alarm you, but I think you should come down to the office." He said, "There's been an update on your case." I could feel my stomach drop. "What's going on?" Carl hesitated. "I think you need to be prepared for something bigger. The homeowner association has been trying to pressure me into dropping the case, and I think Janet might have some connections. I'm not saying anything illegal is going on, but there are individuals in that board who might not be playing by the rules." I didn't need to hear more. I grabbed my jacket and headed straight for Carl's office. When I arrived, Carl laid out a stack of papers in front of me. Documents from the homeowner association emails, and even some internal memos that he had uncovered. The situation was far more complicated than I had imagined. Janet had been using her position as homeowner association president to manipulate the board, pressuring them to push residents into complying with her demands. It wasn't just about my property anymore. It was about her control over the neighborhood. One of the memos even revealed that Janet had been in contact with a local contractor about taking over property maintenance for the entire neighborhood, something that would give her a personal stake in all of the homeowner association's dealings. This was bigger than just some nosy neighbor trying to control my property. Janet was playing a game with much higher stakes. And if I didn't act fast, she would have the power to continue pushing people around, using her position to get whatever she wanted. But Carl wasn't ready to back down either. He had gathered all the evidence we needed to expose what Janet had been doing. We had enough to file a formal complaint against her, and with the right legal backing, we could make her leave her position and put an end to her reign of control over the neighborhood. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew it was the only way forward. I had to fight back. I couldn't let Janet ruin my life or the lives of anyone else in that neighborhood who was too afraid to speak up. That afternoon, Carl and I submitted the complaint. It wasn't long before the homeowner association committee gathered for a special discussion to handle the matter. Janet was present, and I could notice the distress in her expression as the committee members reviewed the proof we had compiled. It wasn't just the penalty notices or the intrusion. It was everything. The coercion, the warnings, the blatant misuse of influence. Janet attempted to justify herself, of course, but her explanations fell apart. The committee had no option but to remove her from the role of president. As soon as the decision was confirmed, I could feel the pressure vanish from my shoulders. Janet had failed. The comfort was brief, though, as I realized this wasn't just about triumph. This was about delivering a statement that no one should possess the ability to dominate and frighten others without repercussions. It was a minor success, but it seemed enormous. For the first time in months, I sensed like I could inhale freely. I didn't need to stress about her appearing on my property anymore, and I could continue experiencing my existence without concern of being tormented by someone who assumed they could govern the neighborhood. Janet had been eliminated, and the homeowner association would now have to function under the values it was initially intended for: justice, courtesy, and shared comprehension. The tale didn't conclude there, though. I stayed in contact with Carl to monitor any potential revenge from Janet, but for now was simply relieved that I had defended my position. I confronted Janet, and in the end, I emerged victorious. And as for Janet, well, she might have forfeited her role, but I have a suspicion we hadn't witnessed the conclusion of her. But next time, I'd be even more prepared.